Hello, my name is Ian Scales. You're watching TelecomTV, and I'm joined today by Ghela Boskovitch. Ghela is 10 years in Fintech. She's quite experienced, and she's a regular magazine contributor and speaker. Amongst a string of accomplishments, she founded FemTechGlobal to address the gender gap. So, Ghela, tell us, first of all, welcome to TelecomTV.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you.
So, tell us a bit about FemTechGlobal, just to kick things off.
So FemTech actually arose out of a report from InnoTribe on the state of gender diversity in the financial services industry. Got a snippet of the report and the number of women who had been interviewed, and I knew half of them and I didn't know the other half. So felt compelled to actually start bringing the network together and meeting more of these women. A, they're inspirational, B, they're experts in their field, and C, there was a lack of community that I felt. So it arose from those three needs: the need to connect, the need to have community, the need to learn. So we're a global network. We have regular community activities in New York, Singapore, London, and on occasion in Copenhagen. We do them in Amsterdam, but we've got chapters that are active and live across the globe. And it really is meant to start changing the dynamic of the conversations we have around policy, gender parity, also quality of life for everyone in the industry, but also the representation of different thoughts and ideas. And really we're based on the premise that diversity of perspective leads to better solutions. And since we actually serve a myriad type of customer, we're meant to be servicing those who have very little financial inclusion all the way up to those that have wealth beyond measure in corporates. And yet we don't actually canvass and look for ideas that are diverse and represent the best solutions to address each of the market segments we have. So if we start to think differently and challenge the status quo of the way we think, asking for different perspectives, asking for different inspiration from emerging markets, we actually end up with some really creative solutions that address financial health, financial inclusion, and financial wellness.
Yes, well, that makes sense. I mean, there's a personal aspect to it as well, in that, you want, women within the industry are, are famously underrepresented, and it's always been the case. Are you not looking to kind of smooth over that gender gap to get more and more women interested?
Absolutely. I think it's a matter of attracting more talent. It's also helping companies, banks, emerging fintechs to write their job descriptions differently, to actually attract a different sort of talent pool. Women in the industry with the expertise are not hard to find. A lot of us complain that we just can't find them. That's not the case. We're just not looking in the right places. We're also not feeding the talent pipeline. Different backgrounds, STEM backgrounds included, especially coming into the industry. We need to start developing the talent pipeline that's much more robust and actually is future-proof. And we know that diversity actually drives business in a number of cases. ROI improves when you have a gender-balanced board. Return on equity has an improvement when you have a gender-balanced team. You're looking at sales revenue. They actually increase significantly for every 1% change in the diversity of the teams, because people buy from people that they know. So if you don't have a diverse team but you're serving a diverse market, you're clearly not having those connections between those who can sell and those who buy. So there's a lot of business case drivers for including a much more diverse team.
How do you find it yourself? Did you think you had to struggle harder to get on in this industry because it's so male-dominated?
I think there were some challenges in terms of my expertise, that I wasn't necessarily taken for what I could offer. Rather, I was assumed to know something or not know something, or being in the room, being the only woman in the room and actually being the decision maker, and yet someone was talking to a colleague or someone that I managed because they assumed as a guy in the suit. So I've seen it personally. I've certainly experienced a number of comments, derogatory comments about being a little bit too emotional or a little bit flighty or whatever, and sort of pejorative, dominant, hard-assed, bitchy sort of adverbs can be attached when someone else would be called decisive, direct, and authoritative. So I see that. Of course, I think we all have our own experiences, but I've been fortunate to have some really good mentors. I've been fortunate to have some really good allies, and I have what I call our ambassadors, who are actually those that are actively promoting women because they see the value that we bring, and I've had a lot of those in my corner as well.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit more broadly about the industry and so on with your experience. A few years back on TelecomTV, we did a survey where we asked our readers and viewers, who was going to win in the payments, and what we called mobile payments then, very binary, I know. And what they thought at the time was, or the majority of them thought, that in the end the banks would win out over the challenge that we thought was coming from the Googles and the Apples and so on. And you know, they would reclaim their natural territory, if you like. You know, what's changed? Does the explosion in payment devices favour challengers or incumbents in this market?
Actually, I think it favors neither. I think it favors e-commerce. And those who dictate e-commerce actually will dictate the payments race. So whether or not they choose to adopt new rails and new technology, let's look at Ant Financial and Alipay, the fact that you can send text messages or money over WhatsApp, that's driven by e-commerce. And the banks were not the decisive factor in that, nor were the challengers that arose in terms of a payment initiation provider. That happened to be whoever the e-commerce giants picked would win. We saw in North America the doubling down on PayPal with eBay, right? Yeah. So there was a hint of that. I don't think it's actually the mechanics of how you pay, it's actually who determines where the transaction really occur. Right now, I would say banks are going to take a secondary position. They'll come back if they adopt a strict tokenization method that disintermediates the card systems, that they can actually do real-time settlement and transfers. If they use tokenization, the tech actually exists to do that. At the end of the day, it's a liability question. So who cares how I pay? It's how my payment is actually protected, insured, and it's reliable. So who manages or who masters the liability game is actually going to be the winner. And right now, that looks like the e-commerce giants.
So, in fact, the argument has kind of moved on, hasn't it? It's not really a kind of binary zero-sum game of winner takes all. Maybe everybody shares to a certain extent and uses their own expertise.
Well, I think there are a lot of opportunities. Payments, unfortunately, has a really narrow margin on the profitability, right? So much tech has arisen that it's allowed us to eat away at the operational costs. So the marginal profit on each of those transactions is being eroded. The value-added service is actually much more important. So where can you start to add value-added service in the payments chain? It may not necessarily be where we see it right now. It may be a data aggregation component where I'm offering advice or instant microfinancing at the point of sale that facilitates the payment but actually isn't the payment. So I think that's the challenge in payments. It's had a lot of tech attack it, and because of that, the margins are eroding. Find me a different business model that actually allows me to add a value-added service on top of that. Part of that, I would say, is can you authenticate or can you manage my identity as a service in context of a payment? That's a value added. Can you keep it private if I need privacy around the transaction? That's a value add. When we can start solving for those value-added service challenges, that's where we'll start seeing profitability in payments. But right now, in terms of operational costs, it's a race to the bottom. And I, as a consumer, know that it costs very little to process or initiate a payment, that all of those legacy historical costs are on the back end because of an architecture that is old and a system and a framework that is old. And that right now, I really don't need that. So I expect to not pay for that. And I think that's one of the challenges is we've got a consumer expectation that says operational costs are nearing zero. I don't want to pay for my transaction fees or my payment fees. On the other hand, there are additional value-added services that you, as an institution, ought to be providing to me, or as a tech provider should be providing to me, and that's where I'll pay for that. But right now, just to get money from point A to B, I'm not going to pay the fee for it.
It was interesting that you should say maybe one of the value-added areas is to kind of make sure you anonymize the buyer. So in effect, the payment provider would be saying, the only way we're going to engage with you, Mr. Vendor, is if you anonymize the data that you collect from our customer, which is...
Absolutely.
Is this a way in, do you think?
I think that's a possibility. I think what we're actually looking at is privacy as a value-added service. Yeah. That will become much more difficult to manage, and we are so free with our data anyway. Just think of how much is out there, how many times you click, yes, I agree to terms and conditions from Apple or Google or Amazon. Every time you click a like on Facebook, all of that data is being pooled, and it's an insight into who we are and what we want. And it's certainly an insight into how someone can get our time and attention. They can get in front of our eyes. And that is a very limited, finite quantity of things that we have. We have time and attention and limit. And that's the premium value. So if I want to be more discreet as a consumer around who actually has my attention, I want to maintain my privacy. If I could actually have someone manage my privacy for me, you better believe I'd pay for that service. So yeah, I think if you can win the privacy, if you can figure out that equation, then that's where profitability will rise.
Just thinking about it, the key moments in any transaction, in fact, the key moments in any engagement with the World Wide Web is when you actually make a payment. So a lot of it runs back to that. You know, you do have, somebody could have some leverage power over that.
Absolutely. My IP address is actually part of my identity.
Yeah,
right?
It is, absolutely. That's interesting. So I suppose techno-optimism says that every device in a connected world can be a payment device, but I wonder, is prudence not leading us to the idea that, and I'm thinking about consumer security and protection, antitrust worries, competition worries and so on, does it mean that we'll need some careful regulation about which devices can be undertaking transactions?
I think so. I think the device actually needs to prove that it can manage tokenization and encryption in a way that meets stringent regulatory requirements. Fraud is definitely going to be a challenge when we've got things initiating payments for other things. That's part of it. When we actually have biometrics that can maybe be breached in some way, shape, or form, they're not the most secure form of authenticating. So I think it is, again, a liability question. So can the device actually meet liability standards? At the end of the day, is the device issuer, i.e. the manufacturer, going to be held liable for a faulty payment? Or is the token manager going to be held liable? Or is that outside of the actual hardware device? So I think when you have a legal standing around the liability of that, then it'll determine what actual devices ought to be enabled for payment or for connection.
Okay, so you wouldn't favour regulation as well?
I do. I think regulation is absolutely mandatory. It puts into place a framework which you actually can then see the legal outcome. So it actually assigns liability from the get-go. And if you're looking at risk appetite or managing risk, that's also a framework for managing risk. So as a consumer, I need to know that someone's actually got their eye out for me. On the other hand, as a bank, I also need to know if I match my compliance risk or my even market risk, if I'm going to be saying I want to work with that particular type of device. So again, it's liability, it's risk management. It's also who's going to pay for something when it goes wrong and who's going to compensate me as an individual when my identity is breached because the device was actually tampered with.
Okay, so just to wrap up then, what will the payments landscape look like in, say, 5 to 10 years' time?
Well, frankly, I'm just waiting for my tattoo to happen, right? And I'm not joking about this. There are a number of companies that actually have started to issue temporary tattoos that have an NFC field embedded in them, and I can wear them. My body provides my password, so to speak. I laugh about it, but I actually think it's a really interesting idea that we ourselves, our identity then authenticates it. It's housed in us as a person, but it's also mapped to us as a conscious actor, or semi-rational actor in an exchange. And I don't want to be worried about my device being lost or stolen or something, you know, a security thing that I can't manage. But if I've got it embedded in my wrist or I have it on the back of my hand, I feel like a consumer just a little bit more secure in knowing that it's with me, it ain't lost. I lose my glasses all the time. You know, I don't want to lose my wallet. But I think it'll be a little bit more not just wearables, I think it'll be embeddables.
Right. I don't want somebody coming and chopping my hand off though to...
Well, frankly, I got nothing in the bank, man, so it doesn't really matter, right? No, but I think it's an interesting way of approaching it, is that we can actually, you know, give somebody something that's not just a wearable, but that's part of their body. It's a little freaky, but I do think I would experiment with it.
It'll probably come.
It's on the way.
Ghela, thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks.